Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 19 of the American Pageant titled Drifting Towards Disunion from 1854 to 1861. As always, we're going to be using the 16th edition of the American Pageant. If you have an earlier or a later edition or a completely different textbook, don't worry about it, the content's going to be the same. To start off, here are the key concepts for this chapter. These are located at the beginning of every chapter in the American Pageant. I know I say this every time, but really try to match the key terms throughout the chapter with the key concepts here because it will really help you organize your information, and it will be super useful on the AP exam because you'll be able to remember important information in terms of how it's related to various themes and eras. So I definitely recommend you do it if you have the time. Okay, so to start off, let's talk about Kansas and Nebraska. If you remember, we talked about how slavery would be decided based on popular sovereignty, so it would either become a slave state or a free state depending on what the people wanted. And so groups from both sides of the issue came to the area to persuade the population to vote in their favor. For example, you have the New England Immigrant Aid Company. This was a free soil group that sent abolitionists to Kansas to ensure the people would choose that they didn't want slavery, that it was going to be a free state. However, the South is very upset by this because the implication of popular sovereignty was that Kansas was supposed to be the slave state. So of the two states, Kansas was supposed to be the one that they got, and Nebraska would be the one for the abolitionists, like the concession. But they saw this as the North trying to, quote, abolitionize both. They thought that the North was being greedy and trying to take both slaves for their own cause. So they send in border ruffians. These are pro-slavery people from Missouri who came into Kansas just as they were about to elect members for the territorial legislature. The ruffians vote and secure their own puppet government in Lecompton, while the Free Soilers respond with their own government in Topeka. And both of these governments are, of course, illegitimate. And so between the New England Immigrant Aid Company and the Border Ruffians, you're seeing this struggle for power that will continue to go back and forth and will eventually burst with the Civil War. And keep in mind that at this point, Kansas had a big enough population that they could apply for statehood. And this leads to the creation of the Lecompton Constitution in 1857, which is drafted by pro-slavery forces and said that people could either vote for or against slavery. However, what they didn't tell them was that if they did vote anti-slavery, one of the provisions of this constitution would protect slave owners. So essentially, this tenet was sort of more for show than anything else, to give the illusion of choice, so to speak. So regardless of what abolitionists tried to do, the Constitution would protect slave owners. And so consequently, this was a very controversial constitution. However, President Buchanan, who replaced Pierce, supported it. And Stephen Douglas, however, condemned its violations of democratic principles of fair play. He said that it literally cannot be democratic because it's not giving people true choices. They're not allowed to choose what they truly want, and therefore it can't actually be popular sovereignty. However, a compromise put the Constitution up for a popular vote, and with many of the Free Soilers at the polls, Kansas just remains a territory. However, your key takeaway from this entire situation is that President Buchanan split the Democratic Party by antagonizing Northern Democrats, which meant the only national party in the entire US is divided because, remember, the Whigs are dead and the Republicans are largely sectional to the north. So the only national party is officially split. This is very important in the future. Okay, so now let's talk about the growing sectional tensions during this time. They are at an all-time high because this is really just before the Civil War, so it's really important that you know these. This is kind of going to be like a throwback or a flashback, whatever, because I did cover some of these concepts in previous chapters, maybe not as in-depth as I will now, so if this seems familiar, it probably is. Okay, so to start off, we have Bleeding Kansas in 1856. This is a civil war in Kansas that was fought intermittently until about 1861, and it eventually merged with the Civil War. We have the caning of Charles Sumner. Remember Charles Sumner, he's a senator from Massachusetts who was beaten with a cane by Senator Preston Brooks from the South after he insulted another Southern senator and condemned the behavior of pro-slavery forces in Kansas. This again shows that there is no longer polite discourse and there are very passionate opinions that are controlling people's actions. And this will really be demonstrated by the violence throughout the Civil War. Eventually, we have the election of 1856. The Republicans choose their first candidate ever, John Fremont, and the Democrats choose James Buchanan, who, as we know, eventually wins, because he has no relation to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which means he has no enemies. Some Southerners threaten to secede if Fremont, the Republican, is elected, which is also a large part as to why he lost. One really important book you should know about is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was written in 1852 by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and it portrayed slaves as humans and not property. This presented the moral argument against slavery, which, as we'll see, will be employed heavily by the North and essentially pushed the North to wholeheartedly fight for abolition because they were able to empathize with the slaves and eventually resist the Fugitive Slave Act. Another book that you should know about, this one is more for the South, is The Impending Crisis of the South. In 1857, this was written by a poor non-slaveholding white farmer named Hinton Helper, and it tried to prove that non-slaveholding farmers suffered the most because of slavery. Southern planter elite fear that they're going to have their slaveholding power taken away from them. They feel like it's being threatened by this book, and that maybe poor whites would betray them. Although the reasoning in this book for not having slavery is very sketchy, it does apply to some Southerners in some way, and it does get them to at least a little bit support the abolitionist cause, which makes the slaveholding planter elite very suspicious. And finally, you should know about John Brown. I sort of condensed everything you really need to know about him into a couple of lines, just because I didn't have that much space, but he is really well known for Potawatomi Creek, where he and his supporters attacked pro-slavery forces. He also leads the smaller Civil War in Kansas, 1856, and this will again later merge with the Civil War. Also at Harper's Ferry, he tried to seize a federal arsenal in the hopes of starting a slave revolt, but someone snitches, he's caught, and eventually executed, which makes him a martyr for the abolitionist cause. Okay, so moving on, talking more about these sectional tensions. One really important court case you need to know about is the Dred Scott court case. If you take anything out of this chapter, it should be Dred Scott. This happens in 1857, and essentially this was a Supreme Court case where a slave named Dred Scott sued for his freedom, arguing that since he was living in the Free Territory of Wisconsin, he should be free. However, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Robert Taney, who is a Southern Democrat, says a couple things. One, African Americans weren't citizens, so they couldn't sue. Two, slaves were property, so it was unconstitutional to take them away from their owners without the due process of law. The third one said that slavery could not be banned by Congress, which implied that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was unconstitutional to begin with, so this was highly controversial. And so because of this court case, Northerners and Republicans are infuriated, but Southerners are even more so because they see it as Northerners refusing to comply with the decisions of the Supreme Court and other laws. So, they're like, you're not listening to the laws, and just being racist. But they are super upset, again fueling these sectional tensions. Another thing you should know about that's sort of relevant, but not really relevant, is the Panic of 1857. Essentially, it was caused by the new California gold that had been discovered. It was inflating the value of currency, and over-speculation of land and railroads only worsened this. Although northern manufacturing was badly hit, southern cotton continued to prosper. So now the Southerners are more willing to secede, knowing that foreign countries will support them because of their reliance on King Cotton. They think that cotton is going to give them this amazing advantage in the war, which, as we'll see in the future, it really won't, because they think that the world revolves around their cotton. And as we'll see, countries don't want to at all support slavery, their fight for slavery, so they're not going to buy cotton from them. They're going to find other sources for buying cotton, so they won't really need the South for anything. Another thing you should know about is the Tariff of 1857. This was made mostly for the South, and it reduced fees on a lot of goods. The Northerners will look for solutions to the low tariff and revenue in the election of 1860. Not really relevant right now, but again, this will come in handy in 1860 because Lincoln will use it to appeal to a broad spectrum of supporters to accomplish his ultimate goal of abolition. In fact, speaking of Lincoln, you should know about the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858. These were obviously between Abe Lincoln, who's a Republican, and Stephen Douglas, who's a Democrat, and they were both competing for the Illinois Senate seat, so they had public debates. And during the debate, Lincoln asked Douglas about the Dred Scott decision. In other words, could slavery be prevented in the territories? Douglas responds with what becomes known as the Freeport Doctrine, saying people in the territories could vote out slavery and overrule the Supreme Court's decision. In other words, he's directly rejecting the Dred Scott decision and saying that popular sovereignty is more powerful than the law. And although this is controversial, Douglas does end up winning the Senate seat, but Lincoln remains a national figure, and as we find out, he will become the Republican Party's nomination in the election of 1860. So keep that in mind. In fact, let's talk about the election of 1860. This is a really important election that you need to know about for the AP exam. Again, one of the top 3, super important. And remember, Democrats are split between the North and the South. The North chooses one candidate, that is Stephen Douglas, who advocates for popular sovereignty and Northern concessions like the Fugitive Slave Act. So essentially he's saying that the North does have to give in to the South at times in order to achieve their own goals. Meanwhile, Southern Democrats choose John Breckinridge, who wants to allow slavery in the territories and wants to annex Cuba, which had many slaves that they could use to work in the plantations in the South. However, the key takeaway from this election is obviously Abe Lincoln, because the Republicans choose him for a variety of reasons. He appeals to a lot of people. For one, he doesn't want the extension of slavery, which is good for free soilers. He wants a protective tariff, which is good for northern manufacturers. He wants a Pacific Transcontinental Railroad, which is good for the Northwest because it'll help them with their trade and just in general connect them more to the country. And finally, he wants free homestead land for farmers. Poor farmers who don't have that much land will be given some, which will hopefully allow them to move up the social ladder. So you're seeing that Lincoln, who's using this broad platform to appeal to everyone, he's not saying the abolition of slavery is his ultimate goal, but internally that's what his thought process is. If he says, oh, I want to abolish slavery, obviously he's going to apply largely to the North, and he's not going to win. So in order to accomplish his ultimate goal, he has to appeal to a broad spectrum of people. And it's not that he doesn't care about all these people, it's just that he wants to do something specifically, and in order to do that, he has to appeal to a lot of people. And another party that is involved in this election but you don't really need to know about is the Constitutional Union Party. This was hastily made as a last attempt at a compromise party, sort of like a middle ground, quote-unquote bipartisan, but it was made up of former Whigs and nativists from the abandoned Know Nothing Party. And essentially it had no definitive platform other than to uphold the Union, which, is sort of the goal of all of the parties, but really this is the only thing this party was running on. But you know how the story ends. Lincoln is elected as the first sectional president, and meanwhile, Southerners meet at Charleston and make plans to secede. And once he's elected, there is a very interesting proposition put his way known as the Crittenden Compromise in 1860. This said that slavery would be allowed in the land north of the 3630 land and prohibited in the South. The South would therefore be guaranteed slavery regardless of the wishes of popular sovereignty. I don't know why I said popular majority, but there it is. Lincoln rejects this compromise, of course. He's like, really, I won. Just come on, let it go. And this essentially means there's no choice but war. And this whole idea of a war is about to begin is solidified when the Confederate States of America under Jefferson Davis secede before Lincoln takes office. This includes about 7 states, and obviously more will go as the battle continues. Others joined them, bringing the total to 11 states, and the then President Buchanan does nothing to stop this. So obviously Lincoln, even though he's elected, he can't do anything because he's not president yet. So until he's inaugurated, he's just sitting. And meanwhile, all those southern states are leaving, and President Buchanan is not doing anything. So, yeah, but the war has essentially begun. So yeah, that'll do it for this chapter. Here are the credits for how we got everything you just saw. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below if you have any questions, and please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us out and lets us know that this video was helpful for you and helps me make more videos in the future. So yeah, see you in the next one.